All right, well, welcome back. This is episode 6 of the Digital Instruction Network, 517 EdTech's Digital Instruction Network. And we are joined today by Karle Delo, who's an instructional technology coach at Ovid-Elsie, and Andrew Tisdale, who is an 8th grade science teacher at Haslett Middle School, and Denise Willbanks, who is a 7th grade English teacher at Ovid-Elsie Middle School. Today, we're going to try to get into the conversation about how to build student relationships in a remote or hybrid setting. This is something that a lot of teachers, their systems really thrive on student relationships. You know, their classroom management is all based around student relationships. Their assessment and feedback is based on student relationships. Their ability to give good instruction is based on student relationships. And so that's been really disrupted since we've been in this remote and hybrid environment. But first, we want to talk about the challenges that they're facing. Now, we know that there's a lot of challenges to building relationships, but we want to talk a little bit about what they see from their spots. We want to talk about how they have found some success, that there are some mechanisms and some tools and some strategies you can use to build good relationships and get some of that interaction back. We want to let them share out a little bit about what they've been talking about. And then we want to talk a little bit about some of the things they're looking forward to, as now that they have started to kind of find some patterns that have been effective for them. What is it that they're looking forward to? So, hey, thanks a bunch, guys, for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So a little bit, well, let's get started. We can get on the same page a little bit. When we say student relationships, what are some of what does that mean?
I can definitely speak to the fact that, like, before this distance learning, like, student relationships, that was my superpower. And then going into this, it's like Zoom is my kryptonite. Like, I wasn't expecting it at all. I wasn't expecting like that disconnect from just being physically with those students to being with the screen in between us. How large of an impact it would have on just everything day to day. So I think it has to deal a lot with trust, like not being able to trust, that person across that screen, because you really don't know them. I mean, we started the year off virtually. So I think it comes down to like trust and, just respect as well. I think it's hard to earn that virtually with students who normally take a long time to give you respect within the classroom, and then to communicate, via Zoom or Google Meet has been, initially extremely difficult.
I agree completely with the trust. I feel like in the classroom, my students have always done what I've asked them to do, and not in an authoritative way, but they've done what I've asked them to do without question, because they trust me and they know that I don't give them busy work, and they know that I always have a reason for us doing what we're doing, and they know that I care about them, and they just get that. And so with my online students, that isn't there as much at all, and it's more just like I'm the lady that makes them do work, and that's hard. That's really hard.
When you have that relationship with a student, like, there's an increased level of understanding both ways. Like, you understand where that student's coming from, you understand their strengths, and it's the same way, the student understands you more when you have that strong relationship. And it is harder with this virtual setting.
And it's even harder just to trust yourself. Like, it's harder to trust yourself that you know what you're doing. I mean, like, going into this situation and really not knowing what's happening the next day, like, for a teacher, what? Like, when we have to turn plans like weeks in advance. So that's unnerving of itself. But what helped me was being mindful of that. Like, being mindful of, like, I'm going to mess up today. Yes, you are. Like, when I look at the mirror in the morning, it's like, you're going to mess up, dude. But then being okay with it and admitting it to them. Like, I am so sorry. Like, I couldn't figure out how to do this. And yes, now, like, this generation, they call themselves Zoomers. Super cool. And like, I didn't know that millennials were like the new boomers. So I was like all proud.
Awesome.
And they were like, oh, he can't figure out how to do this. What a millennial. And I'm like, what?
That's right.
What's
We
going
become
on?
the old people.
Right? Oh, yeah.
When I taught, there was a classroom space. You stood at the door, and I always liked doing hallway duty. Like, I don't know, maybe I was one of the weird ones. I never actually minded it. And I would stand in there during passing periods, and you just said hi to them, like when they came in. And it was just a way of them leaving the space they were in and entering the space that you want them in. And in that space behind you in your classroom, you have the ability to set up everything. You decide what's on the walls, you decide where the desks are all located, you decide what's written on the board or what's playing or whether there's music going, or all sorts of little decisions you make that create the classroom environment. And then that becomes a mechanism for communicating, like Denise was saying, right? Those communication of that you can trust me, of what I'm going to ask you to do, of why, of how I'm going to take care of you if you're struggling, and this kind of stuff. Like, all of that gets communicated in these little itty bitty little ways that are over hundreds of little interactions over the first couple of weeks, where you really get to embed that stuff. And all of that's disrupted now because you're not welcoming them in to your space. You're actually entering into, a lot of them, their space. So,
and not only that, Andrew, I'm thinking too of those little snippets of opportunities where you do get to see them outside of your classroom and the space that you've created. You get to see them in the hallway, or you get to see them as you're walking through the cafeteria, and you get to know more about your students because you get to see them in different school environments. On the other side, though, now we get to see them in their home environment, and we're learning a whole different side of them. So we're just having to learn about them in a different way, obviously, than we ever have.
And so I'm teaching some students face-to-face as well. In the relationship building is actually more difficult than I thought it would be, due to, I can think of two reasons. One is our students aren't using the hallways. They're staying in the same room all day, which is, I think, a smart choice on our part. But so I'm using my cart going to them. And so I kind of have to bring my vibe to them into their room. It doesn't have my posters on the wall. It doesn't have, it's somebody else's classroom. And so I have to really try to bring that positive energy and help them feel safe when I'm in the room, just based off of me and my cart, and that's challenging. Another thing is, with the mass, you don't realize all the little facial expressions that communicate, you can trust me, or communicate to them like, I'm a goofball. I don't know if they're really getting that I'm a goofball, just like this, And so I do find that maybe in previous years, some of the things that I would say that kind of make kids laugh, I'm not really getting those laughs as much. And I have to work a lot harder for it. I have to do body movements and really get into it to get a laugh. When the weather was nicer, we did class outside once, and that was awesome to be able to all distance, take off the mask. And I could just see in their eyes too. They're like, oh, you could just see in their eyes. They're like, oh, I kind of get her now. Just, so even the face-to-face students, I feel like building relationships is on a whole nother level.
Andrew, as you said, the virtual experience is kind of like your kryptonite when it comes to building relationships. So, what are some of the maybe hiccups, the challenges, and then some of the successes you found over the past several months?
I definitely went into this meaning September, thinking to myself, okay, I have 2 weeks. I gave myself that normal time requirement of building those relationships. And I was trying to make it as normal as possible without understanding the reality that this isn't normal. So I had to rethink how I was going to do that, because icebreakers weren't cutting it. Sure, they were great and they were fun, and they were team building. And I got to, some kids were able to, peek their head out and show me who they were. But for the majority, it wasn't happening. And that's when I sounded the alarms. I was like, I need help. Help me, please. But then I found that it's not mutually exclusive. It's not mutually exclusive building relationships in an icebreaker and building content. I do this in the beginning of class. They have a writing prompt, and it's nothing extraordinary. Today's was, if you could bring 5 things to outer space, what would you bring? And then it's in Google Classroom. So they're writing in that format, and then I can respond to them, have like a conversation with them, get to know them through that medium. And I mean, just the function of feedback has been like my number one go-to as to how to form these relationships. It shows them that I care, that I'm here, and that I truly will, value their work. I'm just not making them do things just to do them. So definitely that function of icebreakers and, content aren't two separate things. They can go hand in hand. It has helped me out.
I love that the medium that you're speaking to, not to make us old millennials sound too old, but really, I mean, that is how they communicate on a regular basis, even prior to the pandemic, right? That is how they're building their relationships. And so it sounds like you're meeting them kind of in their comfort space of more of that written, electronic video type of communication. So I think that's amazing. I think you're meeting them where they're at, even if that's not quite where us old millennials are at, but we're getting there.
And it is that deep dive into their culture too, though. And I say their culture, oh my God. But back in my, no. So within that lesson of like, I don't know, like a kid told me my wall was dripping. Like, oh, your wall's dripping. And I was like, what? Like, it's dripping. I thought I had a leak. But no, it meant cool. And I've found a website where I'm like searching up Zoom, like Generation Z vocab. I pray that my students never see this, but within speaking like their language, that's where I started to turn the tide. Like I started to like show viral TikToks, like because I had to download the TikTokery to be cool with them. And then just incorporating these little snippets that I had to go and find, showed them that I was trying. I was giving them, this effort. Yeah, I look stupid. I can't still say dripping without shaking my head. But it's that effort. It's that effort that goes a long way.
Andrew, something that you said brought up a question for me. You talked about them, like some of them peeking out, like from behind their profile pic on the Zoom or on the, Google Meet or whatever. I struggle with that. I find that most of my online students do want to have their camera off. And I want to be respectful, but then I feel like the relationship isn't building, but maybe that's just in my head because I want to see them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't think it's all in your head at all. I think it's extremely important. I mean, have you ever talked to somebody without knowing what they look like and that's all you can focus on, and really like you can't picture it in your head? It's so abstract. That's definitely, we've been there in Haslett, but thankfully our administration has made it like a point to talk to the parents and have them understand how important it is and why this is important to have your camera on, and exactly for the reasons that you just stated about building relationships. Like we can look in our classroom and say like, oh, like Joseph doesn't look like himself today. Like just those little things that Andrew was talking about before too, those hundreds of little things just go into being able to see them. I don't harp on them like, oh, like Jeremy, you need to turn your camera on, because I feel that calls more attention out to them. But at the same time, it's that tricky line that you walk between wanting their camera on so you can see them, but not like publicly calling them out for not having it on. And who knows? I mean, we have to be mindful of what's in that background. Like what is in the background of that camera, which, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir right now. We all know the reasons why, but it is difficult. I don't have one answer as to how to, boost them, but I will have like one survey, like agree or disagree instead of like thumbs up, thumbs down. I do leave your camera on if you agree, or turn your camera off if you disagree. So then you have kids like turning on your camera really quickly and turning it off. And it's the easiest way to see like percentages on like which one has the most vote. And then once it's on, like they have to then click it off, which at that point is another step. And so sometimes that doesn't happen and I trick them into having their camera on.
That is so creative. I love that.
Yeah. I was wondering too, like, I love that, Andrew. like I had a teacher asking me like why, or how they could get more cameras turned on. And the question like I'm wondering is, why do people turn off their camera? Because it happens at staff meetings too. Like with adults turn off their cameras too. So I wonder if even having that conversation with kids, and it might not be in a Zoom or Google Meet, it might be like a forum or a discussion, but like, what are some reasons why people might want to turn off their camera? And then from there, you can start to have an open discussion about like why, it is important sometimes.
I love that, especially because that brings it back to trust and relationship building. Is I'm being honest with you. This is why this is a rule, or this is why it's a norm that we've all established together. Because I said so is not a good enough answer. So I found that students are much more apt to follow my lead when I am just honest and truthful as to the actual reasons, even if I don't agree with them. Just showing them, the pathway to not getting in trouble sometimes is much better than just leading them astray.
You said the word rule, and then you switched it to the word norm, which is an important distinction. I don't think that's not a minor distinction, because it establishes like a rule, you've got to have your camera on. That's a rule. Whereas a norm of you've got to have your camera on says, look, we're all going to probably go through moments where we need to turn our camera off or would choose to turn our camera off. But your default position should be to have it on. And then if you spill something on your shirt while you're in class and you want to turn your camera off as a way of saving face, then turn it off real quick and it's going to be okay. But like, as long as you don't have breakfast on your shirt, please leave your camera on, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of like meeting norms, right? That we have just, staff or whatever. They're not called meeting rules. Like, and if they are, then that's a weird way to lead your team, but whatever. But yeah, I think that norms kind of create a sense of like community, like this is how we act here. This is like what we do here. This is what's appropriate. We all kind of know what we need to do, but like, let's just be explicit in this, first, start to the year, or maybe let's reset mid-year because we've kind of gotten off path of what we are wanting to do. And this reminds me of what you said, Denise, about being super transparent, like the trust that's there, that you're not, assigning things that are, busy work or insignificant. Like you by having that transparent conversation or that survey that you were speaking to, Karle, is saying like, hey guys, like I want you to know why we're doing this, whether it's an actual skill, lesson, assessment, or expectation, norm, whatever it is. Like you're building that trust by kind of showing your hand, which I think is amazing. That reminded me, I wanted to ask you, Karle, specifically, or anybody who's dealing with or had some success with building relationships with like the parent communication piece. Like how is that coming into play as well? Because obviously, to a certain degree, you build those relationships with students, especially with, with younger grades, or, just having that parent communication piece with K-12 is an enormous challenge when it's, well, in general, but then in virtually kind of adds yet another layer. So I'm curious as to how you've handled that, or what ideas you've tackled.
Yeah, I've noticed a big disconnect between students, teachers, and parents, like just across the board. And I feel like it is larger this year than in the past. And part of that is not everybody reads every email that is sent out. And that's not just like, I hear a lot like kids don't read instructions, but guess what? Like people don't. that's like a human thing. And so I feel like that's one of the reasons why there is a disconnect. And so I've been really redundant. I think that being redundant is helpful with trying to get a message out. And video, is always better than just writing. And so even if it's a video for parents or a video, for students who are at home with like how to write an email or how to use whatever learning platform you've got, like, there's let's say I create a video. You got to think about who your audience is and how to best reach them. I know that with parents that might be millennials, probably Facebook. And I know with my students or our students, and this actually might be like old now, but I would prefer Instagram for students. You're making a face, Andrew. Is that now like not cool? That's like a old millennial tool.
Insta. Oh, oof, woof. I actually have no idea. I haven't researched that aspect up yet, so I'll let you know after I research it.
Well, yeah, I know that like Instagram stories, for example, has like a feature where you can ask multiple, like you can ask questions, like multiple choice questions or short response. And I get a lot of views, especially from high school students, and a lot of responses. So once you have a message, you got to think about what's the best way to deliver it. And I do think redundancy is helpful.
I love that you like when we look at the aspect of why social media is like even with Insta or like TikTok, it's quick, it's fast, it's instantaneous. You move on to the next thing. It's a constant feed. And I think where I was having trouble at the beginning of this year was making these instructional videos for parents and then looking at the time and it was like 10 minutes long. What parent is going to sit there for 10 minutes and watch this video to pick out like the main points? My answer was clear, like five parents. So what I did, I started making like a point to 40 seconds. Like 40 seconds is my goal. If I can't communicate what I want to communicate in 40 seconds, I have to figure out a different way. And that has been amazing, especially for my parents, for my kids. It's opened me up and it's helped them understand me more as well too.
I was told recently that like the success of your video diminishes with every minute that you add to it. And that's like streaming capabilities, but also just attention span. So getting your message out quick is helpful too.
Finding the format and the pattern and the time allotment and the mechanism for actually reaching them. When you get that combination right, it can be an effective tool because now they're actually consuming the media you're creating.
Sometimes when we email back and forth, you're like 30 emails back and forth with the student trying to figure out the solution to their problem. And the easy solution is just, can you call me real quick? And sometimes just having that human voice rather than typing it out, it's an instant solution. Or the parent too that's struggling. I always hesitate to call home just because that makes me nervous, and it's like I don't enjoy that. I asked my amazing boss Brian Powell at the beginning of the year, like, hey, I have to call home for a bunch of online students. What do you say first? And he told me this, and I have it on a sticky note on my laptop here so that anytime I have to call home. And he said, start with always asking permission. Do you have a minute? Do you have time to talk, or should I call back later? So that you're asking for permission to have that conversation. And then how do you feel like things are going for so-and-so's at-home learning? And just giving them the opportunity to talk first about how they think things are going. And it just really opens up the door and you get their perspective first. So you're not just barging in with your perspective. I've found that really helpful. It helps me, and I feel like it helps the parent voice how they think things are going first. So that's been helping with building the parent relationships too, is sometimes email is great, but other times they're not understanding, or you're not understanding where things are coming from. And so just that phone call can solve a lot.
I think that's amazing. First of all, just the human interaction like that is so powerful. I mean, how often does that happen with texts, emails, etc., that you can't really express intonation, sarcasm, specific emotions, and what might be 3 days of virtual interactions could be completely cleared up in the matter of 30 seconds. And then secondly, I love that you open the door for that initial relationship building, right? Like you are allowing them to be heard first and foremost. And then that gives you a sense of like, how do you approach the next thing you're going to say, right? If you were coming in guns blazing because something went down, that's fine for you to share what you need to share, but how you approach that might be very different than now that you've, kind of get a sense of where the parents are coming from. So I love that. That's a great approach.
Okay, I love that asking for permission part, because truly we are entering into their world. A former colleague told me, like, make that contact at the beginning of the year. Don't be a bill collector. Do not like collect those bills when it's test time. You want to like be known. And that what you just said, Denise, of like just ask those little steps is, I mean, instantaneous trust. That usually would have to take like what, 40 emails to get to finally. So I think that's super powerful.
That just reminded me of also like calling home or reaching out for those awesome things that are happening. I can't tell you how many times as a teacher I would really make an effort once a week to make like a couple positive phone calls or emails home, and like the surprise sometimes you would hear in the voice of the parents, like, oh, like this is why you're calling. And even for the kids that maybe might hear some of those things a lot, like taking that time to be like, yeah, I'm sharing positive feedback, like that goes so far with both parents and students, as we all know. So I love that, not being a bill collector, but also surprising them with, hey, just wanted to say good job today.
And I know time is short. Nobody has enough time right now. Like time is at a premium. So I can see where, some people are like, I don't have time for that. Like I don't have time to drop like a cute note sprayed with sprinkles over, across the desk.
And like perfumed and
Right,
pretty.
yeah. Like a butterfly flies out and there's nice from Paris. But you do have time. Because this is what's important, and it's building relationships within your classroom. That's like the most important thing. And then content can come after that. But make time to build relationships is like the biggest thing that I have to keep on telling myself. Like the content can be learned. The holes are going to be like filled, but the relationships is how we get there.
And I think that there's an elephant in the room here too. What you're saying specifically, Andrew, that the content can be build relationships first. I think that the relationships 100% connect to the engagement, which 100% connects to the learning, right? Without the relationship, your engagement is at a deficit. So I think we all know that, but I think you just hit the nail on the head, Andrew. Like that, it just has to be number one, most definitely. I'm curious, does anybody have any examples of engagement strategies or activities or just fun stuff that you've tried, or maybe funny stories of things that you tried and didn't have quite the effect that you wanted, but maybe you got a laugh out of it? I don't know. What do you have to share?
I actually tried on a couple of different occasions throughout my teaching career to do the positive call home thing. And all I ever did was confuse people. Like it was not an effective tool for me. I gave it a go, but they would go, and I felt like, okay, that was just really awkward. Maybe we'll try that again later. And I tried again later and it would go the same way. So
I can't stop laughing about that, because to me, like that phone conversation, like Denise was saying, or like the nerves start happening, like you get adrenaline, like you're about to go run a race, to call a parent to say like, hey, Suzanne did a great job today. Like, why are we so nervous to do this? But the reasons are unimportant. What matters is like, find your format that works for you. I hate talking on the phone. I think people who call me on the phone are weird. I will text you back. And I think that's the same aspect with, most parents. Like I will email.
millennial.
Oh my God, did you hear he texts? He doesn't snap. So it's it's definitely speaking the language of how they want to communicate. It's not me choosing, it's them. And so once you find that, stick with it. And not everyone's the same.
An easy way that doesn't take a lot of time that I started doing was giving weekly awards. And so it's kind of an email template that I made that I can just copy and resend every Friday. But some students were just being amazing and I wanted to award them for that. And so what I did was like, I chose 6 awards, like person who showed the most growth mindset this week, person who was like the best in their book club, like they were just a great book club member, person who, oh gosh, was the kindest, just kindness award. And so I have like 6 awards, and I have a little Bitmoji of me, like with whatever the award is, that it stays the same, for each award. And I just send it out on Fridays to all my students with the name of the student who got the award, and then a little sentence about why. And then I blind carbon copy their parent, just those students' parents on the email too. So the parents are getting that positive feedback of like, oh my gosh, my kid got the kindness award, or oh, my kid showed a growth mindset, and I usually type a little sentence why, like, she asked me a great question about feedback on her writing just because she wanted to improve as a writer, like, isn't that cool? And so the students get to see that, they feel recognized, and the parents get that too.
Well, and you mentioned a specific thing they did, because that staves off the potential that they're just in like a rotation, that like you actually noticed something that I actually did, and you actually like it, like
Right,
like
instead
it-
of the participation
authentic.
award that everybody gets, like this is personalized.
Yeah, like there was an authentic moment where you as student impressed me as teacher, and I wanted to commemorate that because I was impressed.
Yes, absolutely. And for some, there was one girl who was very disengaged for the first few weeks, and she did something great. And I immediately was like, oh my gosh, I need to seize this opportunity, and gave her an award. And she emailed me how much that meant to her. And I've noticed the engagement has went up. She is doing a lot more work, and just the quality of work and things like that have went up since I gave her that little public appreciation for what she did.
This is a little bit different because it's not about building relationships necessarily with students, but I feel like right now, even between teachers, relationship building is more difficult. I've been doing something similar to Denise, but with teachers. So like having a teacher spotlight to kind of show, and I feel like the best part of that is showing the cool things that are happening, because you might, other teachers might see that and get an idea. Those conversations in the lunchroom and in the halls with teachers are gone too. So finding ways to foster relationships between teachers is really important as well.
I mean, isolation is real. Like it is a real thing, and it creeps up on you. It's crept up on me this year. I was like, why am I always like sleepy and sad, and my hobbies don't mean anything to me anymore? Like, weird. It is something that needs to be talked about within like your staff. Like, if mental health is not a focus for teachers, like, I don't know what else should be right now. I set up like a Google Classroom just for teachers as a collaborative space, so we could like chat on the stream, share our folder, our things that we've actually created and know that work in these folders. And within just that small little, it took me 2 seconds to create it, but the community and the bonds and the sharing aspect of it definitely, brings a lot of people like me out of their funk, knowing that other people are going through the same things as you are, even though it's hard to admit as a teacher that you're having problems or issues or, the downfalls of your experience.
That's such a cool idea, Andrew. I've heard of one other school doing that, and it's their virtual staff lounge. So they're all in there. Now that's been used as more of a resource sharing, like here's something that I learned that I wanted to share, but it's not been used much with the stream for just like checking in on people or like commenting. And I think it would probably just take like one person to start that for that whole piece of Google Classroom to be used by staff. I love that. Use the stream just for chatting, and you're off Zoom, you're off Meet, but you're still able to connect without having to be sitting in front of your screen like you're doing for the rest of the day. Such a great idea. How about using stream or like chat features within Google Meet or Zoom or Classroom? Are you guys finding that as a way to connect with students as well?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is like my number one thing that it was like mind blow moment. The chat feature within Zoom, like I hated it at the beginning. I'm like, oh my gosh, like these kids are talking about, I don't know, something Gen Z. And I was like, they're not using it appropriately. I didn't teach them how to use it appropriately. That's why they were not using it appropriately. And so just taking it away is not the answer, I found. But one day I noticed a student asked a question. So like the class, and another student answered it. And I was still teaching. I was still going through like the slides. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the class didn't stop. There wasn't a pause. Focus didn't get turned away. This is amazing. And so now we came up with norms on how to use the chat, and the relationships that kids are building with each other, just by that feedback and that respect of answering questions and being able to be like vulnerable enough to ask that question, because there's a huge difference between typing your question in or turning the mic on and like asking your question verbally. A giant difference. So that chat feature, like I'm going to miss it when we go back to face, because it is such a benefit that it's hidden. Like I really think it's hidden for a lot of teachers that don't see its potential and value.
Yeah, right away when I started doing Google Meets too, I would ask them a question and they'd start to type the answer in the chat, and I'd be like, no, unmute your microphone, talk about it, like, come on. And why, like, it drove me crazy. Why are they just typing their answer in the chat? And then it took me a couple of times to realize, like, okay, we can just roll with this if this is what they'd rather do. And so now I'm doing a lot of like, okay, everybody type in the chat, and it's working great. And I really I think Karle gave me the tip once to say, okay, what do you think the answer is to this question? Type it in the chat, but don't hit send. Like, don't hit enter. Just type it in the chat so we can all see what you think. And then ready, 1, 2, 3, everybody press enter. And then you see everybody's thoughts. And sometimes that's really neat, because it gives everybody time to think, with just like, oh, well, whatever the first kid said, that's what I think too, And so there's so many little tricks and tips with using chat well, and just embracing it. So yeah, I was right there with you.
That was cool. Like, it's the same kind of idea of like, everybody write it secretly on your whiteboard and then we're all going to show it at the same time. But it doesn't require a tool. Like the number of times we got asked early in the game, like, you have a good whiteboard tool. I just need a good whiteboard tool. As long as all you're needing them to do is type words, that structure it's already, just have them type in the chat and we'll just hit enter. 1, 2, 3, go. Like, oh man, I hadn't even thought of that. Like, this is authentic, like, processing right now. That's the coolest idea.
Here's another one from another teacher here, Justin Vetter. If it's multiple choice, enter which one is wrong and explain why it's wrong. The answer's wrong. So that's kind of another way to use the chat feature to get kids to open up and start sharing.
Well, that's kind of a cool idea too, because then you're sort of seeing there's 3 different things they might all write as opposed to one thing. Like, if they all know if they learned well when you taught them, then they're going to put one thing and everybody will say the same thing. Anybody who might have gotten that wrong can just wait for the first 10 or 12 answers to trickle in and then pick, right? But then if they have to choose a wrong thing, then you get a bunch of different answers and you can kind of deduce. Like, that one, that kid actually chose an answer that should have been right. But he also had reasoning, and his reasoning wasn't all that bad. He's just missing a piece. Oh, there's formative assessment potential in that. That's kind of cool too.
Some higher level thinking too.
Oh, man.
I do every Monday, I do like a pre-recorded video of strengths and weaknesses from the last week, and then a preview of what we're going to do and learn this week. And in the reflection of the last week, I always make a point to put student work samples. If we did something cool and artsy, cool, I'll post some pictures of that. But even if it's just some sentences that I can point out, like, hey, here are some strengths from last week. Look at this person's discussion board post. And I'll just have like a little screenshot and talk about it. And I'll say, oh my gosh, look at this. Or look at every time someone commented on their discussion board post, this girl was like, thank you. I'll look into that. Thank you for looking at my work. Like, that is so great. Isn't that kind of her to do that? And I'll just try to, go over the strengths and weaknesses in a way that also highlights some students. And so I think there might be some engagement there that they know my work could be in that Monday night video, or that Monday, review, preview video that I do. So hopefully not in the weakness spot, but in the strength spot. No, I don't usually use names at all. I usually blur those out with the tools to blur it out. But
Really quickly, Denise, you mentioned like feedback or like commenting on, students commenting on other students' work of like, oh, this could be improved. I really love this aspect. Have you found that it is you had to go about it a different way within the virtual format of teaching that skill of how to equitably like provide feedback, like student to student? Because I found like for me in my class, like I've had to explicitly go step by step by step. It's like they've never had like given equitable feedback before.
yeah, and I think they haven't. And so we need to treat it like any other skill that we are teaching them for the first time. So, if I were to teach you a brand new sport that you've never played, like lacrosse, and you're not really getting it on the third time, I wouldn't be upset with you for that. I would just, you've never played lacrosse before. And so we're going to work on it. Probably you're not going to be good at lacrosse even in the first month, right? Like it's going to take you months of practice before you can actually get that gold star for being good at it. And I think, discussion boards is a whole brand new territory for these students. And so, yeah, like they're still not where I want them to be, and that's okay. Maybe they'll be where I want them to be at the end of the year. And if not, maybe next year. Like it's not something that needs to be instantly great. 3 different times now, I have said, okay, you're going to be graded on this discussion board post, on your first quality post, responding to 2 classmates, and the little polite responses. Because if somebody's going to take the time to read your work and comment on it, you need to at least say thank you, And so I made a big deal about that. And all 3 times when it came to start grading, I said, nope, can't do it, because it wouldn't be good, because it's not even in the ballpark of what I'm looking for. So let me just click. It's not good. It's going to be ungraded, but it was still worth doing. And, maybe someday we'll grade it, but they're definitely learning. Practice. That's all I can say, Andrew, is it's definitely not where I want it to be. So the only strength I could say was that they're starting to say thank you. That was the strength. That's the growth that we've had.
I'm still learning that skill. So for them, that's quite amazing. But I thought you brought up a super amazing point of that growth mindset. Like we as teachers preach this growth mindset to our students of, you stumble, you fall, you get back up. We need that growth. Like I had to admit that I needed this growth mindset, and it was hard for me to admit that I have shortcomings and things aren't going to be perfect my first month of teaching distance. And I mean, it's the only way that I was able to grow and learn is admitting my defeat to the kryptonite that is Zoom. And then, pushing forward. And my students are able to see that. Like I make fun of myself all the time. Like, what am I doing? And so hopefully that's, seeping in and transitioning into a lesson. If not, I'm just making fun of myself for, comedy's sake, and they're welcome, I guess.
Yeah. And when I'm getting ready to grade something, when I get to that first students and it's like, oh, this is really not what I was looking for, I try to think, well, did I make a video about how to do it correctly? Did I provide them with an example? Did I provide them with a non-example? You know what? I didn't. So is that really even fair of me to hold them accountable to something that I didn't really set them up for success like I, thought I was when I made that? So, we have to have so much grace with ourselves right now. And I keep telling my students, let's have this be mutual. Like I'll give you lots of grace. You give me lots of grace. Okay. We all need it right now.
Yeah. And I don't want it to get missed in the mix that you mentioned that I had an idea. I was going to grade this thing. And then I looked at it and I was willing to not grade this thing. Like, I think that there's in and of itself, that's a relationship building component, because you're admitting to the students that like, look, I'm not going to use my grades in any kind of a weaponized way. Like, I'm going to give you a grade when I feel like it makes sense to report out that you've learned something. and when it's fair for me to report out that maybe there's some ought to, that by now you ought to have learned something and your grade is what it is, because maybe you're not where you ought to be, and then I want to be able to talk about that. But if I recognize that none of you ought to be anywhere because I haven't really positioned you very well to be anywhere other than where you are, then the grading mechanism doesn't really make much sense at that point. And so I really thought that was, I mean, I don't want that to get missed as a little sidebar. You mentioned that almost in passing, but I was like, that's actually a really important component of being willing to use your grades for what they're intended to be used for, and then using that as a mechanism to build relationships as well.
I think that is something that teachers are just now discovering. They like don't have to grade every single thing that they put in, like assign. Like I have like maybe 10 grades for this entire semester. Whereas like, you know, some people have like 123. I'm like, what? Like, how do you even sleep at night? But it's valuing yourself too, and valuing them as to that function of feedback and respect. What do you want your grades to really mean? Do you want them to mean like, this is turned in late? Or do you want it to mean I'm measuring their success at gaining this knowledge? And that's a question you have to ask yourself if you're entering in all those grades.
I love all of this. I don't know, Karle, did that remind you of the learning zone versus the performance zone from TI4? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, that I think it's so powerful that you are all you're humanizing yourself and you're being very transparent with like, oh, that didn't work, or gosh, no wonder you didn't know that. I haven't, given you enough chances to practice to learn it. And I think that we've all had a teacher maybe where they're very much like, I'm right, this is the way it is. And versus the teacher that's, much more flexible and willing to, show their own successes and failures. And I think sometimes teachers get uncomfortable with being in that learning zone, right? That like, oh, I'm going to try this out. I've never done it before. But if you're doing that, you're modeling that behavior and that you're building that kind of culture with your students. And it's not easy. Absolutely, it's not easy. But I think that it really can, in the long run, do what we're all here today to talk about, is just, continue to build those relationships that then feed into engagement, that, feed into, positive student outcomes.
So we've talked a lot about strategies that we are using for, building relationships with our students, and just kind of tidbits here and there. We've had an awesome conversation, but like putting things into practice and things that we can take away and implement in our, 8 o'clock Zoom session tomorrow. Let's maybe peek at some ideas, Denise, that you put together of things that have worked for you, that you have implemented within your Google Meet sessions for your virtual kids.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was talking about those weekly review or preview videos that I do, this is just like a little visual. I usually just make a Google slideshow and, couple slides, and then I screencast it and I make sure that my picture's in there. And I have really had the standards go down and down each week of myself in the camera. Like, you know what, if it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm in my pajamas, I don't care. I'm still turning that camera on because they need to see my face to build that connection. And I don't, I used to care. I stopped. There's no makeup, you just roll with it. And like I said, including those student work samples are great. Let me go back to the beginning of this here. So in Google Meets, I really try to do a lot of fun stuff. I have mood slides. I do a lot of scavenger hunts. We've done a build a story through the chat and do would you rather questions. So a build a story through the chat would be like, I'm a language arts teacher. So, maybe one student types a sentence like Bob walked into the store, presses enter. Then the next student writes like, and he ran into his arch nemesis, enter. And so we just kind of go through and have maybe 5 or 6 students like keep the story going. And that's been super fun. Letting them type the answers to a lot of these questions in the chat. The scavenger hunts, though, we usually will turn the cameras on for those. This is just an example of like an icebreaker question. Type in the chat, which quote most resonates with you today. describe how your day is going in 3 words or less, those types of things. Are you more of a pizza or taco person? I actually, for this question, I had a boy who has not talked at all or answered any questions. He usually types IDK in the chat for everything. And he actually typed like 2 sentences about his love for tacos. So that was an opening to him actually participating a little bit more. And I noticed that this week he participated about content related things a little bit more too. So these little dorky questions can go a long way. Scavenger hunts. I started out them just being random, like find something yellow, find something old, find something new, or find something round, those types of things. But this week I started to incorporate scavenger hunts with the content that we're learning. So it takes a little bit of thinking, but how can I have them find something in their house that relates to this? So even if it was a story we read this week, hey, in a story we read this week, there was this, there was this, there was this. See if you can find something in your house that relates to those 3 things. And then, like Andrew was saying earlier, they have to turn the camera on to show the items that they found. Maybe they'll leave their camera on a little bit longer. This is just a little snippet of my weekly email that I send with the little awards for the weekly awards. Just a tip to be you in your videos. Don't try to be all stiff and professional, like just be you. That's going to help you build those relationships with the kids better. Maybe rolling with mistakes. I know in the spring when I made videos, I would edit the mistakes out, and now I'll just kind of laugh at myself. Another thing that I do, the bottom one there on the screen, is I'll say in the middle of an email, in the middle of a video, like, shoot me an email if you've ever done that. Or if I'm typing in a document and, Google tries to guess what I'm going to say, I'll say like, oh, do you guys like that feature? Shoot me an email if you like that feature, or if you don't, I want to know, and so it kind of makes the videos a little interactive that way too. And gets that communication flowing. I also have been using Clickbait. Like, I'm getting some tips from marketing, and I make my email subjects to them like, did you see this? Or this will make your day amazing. And then they click on it and it's like something language arts related, but they clicked on it, or I'll like, yes, no, which are you? And then they'll, open it up, and it's a Google form that I want them to take about whatever. And so I have been stealing all of those grabby subject lines from the emails in my inbox. And that's it. Those are my, hopefully, little things that you can take with you maybe tomorrow and do in your Zoom or in your emails. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, just even the way that you were talking, like, drop me an email. I'm like, am I watching the YouTubes right now? Like, what? Like, I feel like it's like a YouTuber, like, how they're like, click subscribe, drop a comment, like, Gen Z. Like, so it goes back to that conversation of speaking their language, what they're used to, and like not fooling, not tricking, but just suggesting in a very authentic way to click on this. Like, oh, can't believe what I heard. I'm going to use that tonight.
Yeah, I had a boy who had not logged on, done anything, and I sent him an email that the subject was just, OMG, are you okay? And then in the email was just like, are you okay? Like, just like, what happened? And he responded back and was like, I'm fine. I was like, oh, good. I was so worried about you. And that was the first time he ever responded to any of my emails, was just like, OMG, are you okay?
I mean, that definitely gets like your point across, instead of, this huge email like, you were not present on September the 22nd, and I have concerns about like your responsibility. Like, no, OMG, like, are you okay? Got that conversation started, which is, I mean, the intention of all communication. That's awesome. Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna like get in trouble or be praised for the clickbait that I'm going to be creating, but I'm gonna do it anyways.
So now I'm curious, do you ever get any emails back? Like, do they email you and say, No, I actually rather hate it when Google tries to finish my words for me. Google, I know what I'm trying to write. Thank you very much. I'll finish my own sentences.
Yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. And oftentimes the students who will shoot me those kind of emails are sometimes the students who haven't been engaged with the learning. But it's like, oh my gosh, they watched my video and they responded to that. So that's something to build off of, right?
Wow. Okay. That was awesome. We just did an hour. So I mean, one of the things that just seems to be coming out is that like, there's an authenticity built in, like a lot of Denise's points, but a lot of Andrew's points as well. Like putting yourself in a position where you're giving the student somebody to build a relationship with. You're not a face on a screen. You're not the box talking at you. Like you're a human being, and you're able. We've got a lot of very comfortable habits that get built in when we're interacting with people face to face because we have several decades of experience doing it. And with this, a lot of that experience doesn't play the same. And so we've had to learn new things. And I think that those suggestions you guys made, the stories you guys told, just have all kinds of little pieces of wisdom built into that, and lots of things that are really tangible that people could try. So thank you. I mean, Andrew said he's not very good at saying thank you. I'll model it for him. Thank you very much, everybody, Karle and Andrew and Denise for being willing to join us. I want to give you guys a chance to give your last word. So Karle, why don't you go first? Last word.
Does it have to be one word?
It doesn't have to be a single word. It can be several sentences, but
I would say my last word is this is a season. This is temporary, I hope. And I feel like educators will come out of this with more tools than they had before because it is challenging. And I feel like our students might do the same. If we're teaching them we're teaching them skills right now through virtual learning that they have not had to learn yet, that could make them more successful in communicating, as an adult. So this is a season and it might make us stronger.
all right, Christy, last word.
The word relationships, I'm going to pull out my SLP background here, but the base word is relate. And so I think when we allow our students to relate to us, then we're going to relate to them better. I think the relationship just grows from there. They're seeing our mistakes. They're seeing us do things that are out of our comfort zone. They're going to be willing to do the same. So I think if we want our relationships with our students to grow, we just really need to come back to how are we truly going to relate to them, meet them where they're at.
Andrew, last word.
Choose courage over comfort. You cannot be courageous and try new things and learn new things if you are just comfortable. So take this as a learning opportunity, like Karle was saying, and grow. Don't just see it as something you have to, hurdle you have to jump. Like truly value your time and their time.
Allison, last word.
Last words. Thank you all for coming. You left us with some amazing examples, ideas, and really truly things that you are living right now, and the stories that you shared are just so powerful, and I think will resonate with so many of our listeners and viewers. But I think you hit the nail on the head with everything you spoke to, was building those relationships no matter what as kind of the number one most important thing to do right now. And then after that comes the engagement, comes the learning. And I think you all are doing such a beautiful job of that. And then secondly, building those relationships in the medium that you and your students are comfortable with, and that what works best. Not trying to, reinvent the wheel, but find an area where you can both communicate in a way that you feel like you're building relationships like you were face to face. So
Denise, last word.
Just that we need to keep reminding each other not to give up on students, and not to give up on even just the different tech. I keep thinking of how Andrew was frustrated maybe with the chat and how students were chatting with each other during the Zoom, but then that turned out to be something he loved. So the thing that's bothering you, a couple of weeks from now, you might love it. So don't give up on it.
Isn't that just always going to, like, as a teacher, like that student that just like grinded your gears at the beginning of the year, and then you're like, oh, you're my favorite now.
Karle, Delo from Ovid-Elsie, Andrew Tisdale from Haslett, and Denise Willbanks from Ovid-Elsie. Thank you so much for being here, guys.
And as a reminder, all of the recordings from season 1 and soon to be season 2 of our digital instruction network can be found in our 517 EdTech website, as well as additional resources on our EdTech playlist and always on Twitter. Keep an eye out for upcoming sessions in season 2, and we hope to see you in our future recordings. Thanks.